never forget what we fought for 100 years. With blood, sweat, broken bones, death and tears. They call us radicals and thugs.
This is Steve Zeltzer with Work Week, and I'm with Bruce Allen, who is a member of UNIFOR, retired member of UNIFOR Local 199, and has been involved in the struggle to defend workers at his GM Propulsion plant and workers of Canada and linking up with workers around the world. So welcome to our show, Bruce.
I'm most glad to be with you.
So, Bruce, there was a rally last weekend of UNIFOR around the issue of the tariffs and the trade war, which is going to have devastating impact on Canada. What's happening in Canada, and what are unions and workers doing in Canada about the trade war?
Well, unions at the present time are loudly opposing the tariffs, but they really don't have much in the way of strategy. Essentially, they've lined themselves up behind what the Canadian government is doing in terms of simply supporting counter tariffs and not giving any indication that they have any idea what to do beyond that. And they're not. There's no coordinated effort by unions in response to the tariffs at all, and it's particularly egregious in that respect because UNIFOR is outside of the Canadian Labour Congress, so it's largely essentially isolated from the rest of the labor movement, and it's not in any way coordinating with any other unions in response to the tariffs.
And of course, the Canadian auto workers used to be attached to the UAW. What happened with that breakup, and what do you think about what Shawn Fain has done, the president of the UAW, in supporting Trump's tariffs?
Well, there's a lot of history there going back to the mid-1980s. Originally, the Canadian section of the UAW split from the UAW and formed the Canadian Auto Workers, principally in response to the direction of the UAW. The Canadian section of the union was taking a more fighting approach to dealing with the auto corporations and resist, and as much as they could, as much as we could, we're resisting at that time anyway. We're resisting contract concessions. So that's what precipitated the split. Subsequently, in years that follows, the Canadian Union has made a lot of concessions as well. But there's been little in the way of a relationship between the Canadian Auto Workers Union, which is now UNIFOR, and the UAW. And in terms of Shawn Fain, I mean, as far as I can tell, and I'm certain this is the case, there's absolutely no coordination or communication whatsoever with what Shawn Fain is doing in response to these tariffs, and certainly UNIFOR's position on the tariffs is essentially diametrically opposed to what Shawn Fain is doing. He's basically, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, he's come out in favor of Trump's tariffs in the auto and auto parts industry, which we think is a terrible position.
Well, trade wars historically have pitted worker against worker, and the capitalists have benefited by pitting worker against worker. What would be an international policy linking up workers in Mexico, Canada, and the United States in auto, for example?
Well, here's what I think, and I've been involved in efforts on and off to develop support mutual solidarity between Canadian American Canadian American and Mexican auto workers going back to the early 1990s, when I was involved in some efforts that took place to have trinational conferences. What's really needed, ideally what we need is a coordinated relationship based on mutual solidarity between Canadian American and Mexican auto workers to back each other up in the face of what the auto corporations are doing to us, and in the face of what governments like Donald Trump's government are doing to us. That would give us the greatest possible strength. And as I see it, the ideal outcome of that, something I believe would be a good idea, would be the formation of a North American-wide auto council, which Canadian, Mexican, and American auto workers would be participants in on an equal basis. And the purpose of that council would be to strategize together, to support each other, and to advance our common fights.
And this need for internationalism in the face of trade war, also the rise of fascism. Are workers in Canada concerned about the rise of fascism, and what do they think about the Trump government?
Well, prior to Trump getting reelected, admittedly, some Canadian workers liked him, and some liked his denunciation of trade agreements like NAFTA. But all of that's gone by the board now. There's general hostility to Trump among workers in this country. They see him as a threat to our livelihoods and our jobs. And with the exception of a few pockets of support in places like Alberta, people are pretty hostile to Donald Trump and see him as totally against our interests.
Well, there was the recent election. The Liberal Party won. It's a capitalist party. A banker, international banker, is the head of it. Is there a working class political alternative for workers in Canada?
Well, the New Democratic Party is a social democratic party, and historically it always had a formal relationship with organized labor, but that relationship has been seriously weakened over time. A number of unions don't support it, including UNIFOR. Some unions have basically backed the Liberals. In the worst case scenario, in the last election, you had the Union of Operating Engineers, who actually supported the Conservatives, whose policies in many ways are similar to Trump's. So there's not much in the way of a relationship between the NDP and organized labor anymore. But in any case, it really is not of much consequence anymore, because the NDP took serious losses in this election and had their number of seats cut by more than half. And they have so few seats left in the Canadian Parliament, they don't even have party status anymore. And their percentage of the vote Canada-wide was only just barely over 6%. So it even if it were really a Labour Party, which it's not, because every time the NDP gets in power, they basically abandon workers' issues. It would be ineffective, and it would really not constitute a viable political option for us.
Well, UAW President Sean Fain, during his campaign, his election, at Labor Notes, he talked about internationalism, linking up with Canadian and Mexican workers, and fighting against nationalism. What happened? Why did he flip?
Okay, well, I followed the developments in the UAW very closely. I've had many friends who are UAW members for decades now, going back to the days of New Directions in the UAW. What I think has happened, now Sean Fain did make statements to the effect about supporting Canadian and Mexican auto workers, and I believe during the last set of contract negotiations with the auto corporations, he made overtures to the UNIFOR president, Lana Payne, to develop a coordinated strategy during that strike. But unfortunately, Lana Payne rebuffed that offer. And what's happened since then is he's basically gone off on his own direction, and I think he's completely turned away from the kind of politics or the kind of orientation that he had when he was campaigning to be UAW International President. And now with him embracing Trump's tariffs, he's essentially broken that any relationship he had with us, or any potential relationship he had with us, and he's not at all where we would like to see him at. And in fact, from my perspective, I would like to see the UAW at the forefront of the opposition to Trump's agenda in the United States, and they're not doing that whatsoever.
And as you know, there is no Labor Party in the United States. You basically have the Democrats and Republicans, and it sounds like it's the same in Canada. In the face of China and the fact that U.S. companies, auto companies, can't compete with China as well as European auto companies, what's the future for organized workers in auto industry?
Well, the future, that's very unclear. the only thing that really is clear is there's an ongoing transition towards electrical vehicles, which will be far less labor intensive and involve the employment of far fewer workers. And there's no effective strategy to come to terms with that. In terms of how China fits into that, I can't really say. The one thing I think needs to be said with respect to China, and it's been completely forgotten, is that workers in North America and other countries should take a position that they're in solidarity with Chinese workers and should support labor struggles to the extent that they happen in China, and look at the workers in China as our allies.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Bruce Allen. He's a retired president of UNIFOR 199, which represents GM workers at a propulsion plant in St. Catharines. So thanks for joining us in Work Week and Solidarity, Bruce.
Okay, solidarity, and I want to send my very best wishes to American auto workers and tell you that we're friends and comrades, and we should see ourselves as nothing but friends and comrades, and we should be supporting each other every step of the way.
Thank you.